Why Communist China is determined to weaponize Ebola. Commentary. Since the world's first Ebola outbreak in Zaire in 1976, the world's bioweapons chiefs recognized the importance of exploiting the Ebola virus's 80% lethality. China's communist neighbor, the Soviet Union, may have been first off the mark by attempting to create a bioweapon that it called Ebolapox, which would give the hemorrhages and high mortality rate of Ebola virus, which would give you a blackpox, plus the very high contagiousness of smallpox, said Kenneth Alibek, the former chief scientist and first deputy director of the Soviet-era Biopreparat Biowarfare Agency. This bioweapon program remained active into the 1990s, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. China might not have been far behind Russia in seeking to exploit Ebola's potential. According to the Indian Defense Review, in 2003 the powerful Chinese Academy of Sciences announced in Paris that it wanted to acquire Class 4 pathogen laboratory which could harbor the most dangerous viruses. That same year, according to Canadian Security Intelligence Service documents released to Canada's Parliament, Chinese scientist Xiao Xianghua began work at Canada's high-security Class 4 National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg that would yield critical Ebola breakthroughs for the Chinese military. In 2012, SIS revealed that Ms. Qiu was collaborating with an individual or entity that works closely with the PLA to acquire Western technologies. In 2013, officials from China's Academy of Military Medical Sciences, known for its biological weapons development, nominated Ms. Qiu for a Chinese International Cooperation Award for work in Canada that provided the Chinese side with the Ebola genetic sequence, which opened a door of convenience for China, according to the Epoch Times. China's Ebola initiatives preceded by more than a decade the West Africa Ebola epidemic of 2014, when Ebola exploded into the public consciousness with fears of an epidemic in the United States and Europe that galvanized the world's attention. Moreover, of all the deadly pathogens studied, Ebola was foremost in Ms. Qiu's mind, said Israel's Danny Shoam, an expert on China's biological warfare program, who characterized Ms. Qiu's Ebola research as the priority pursued with utmost attention. When the 2014 epidemic hit, China quickly positioned itself at the center of the international community's response effort, providing $123 million toward the $1 billion fund that the United Nations requested to fight the epidemic, more than most traditional Western donors such as France and Canada, and far more than any country when measured using the UN's per capita metric. In addition to its cash contribution, China maximized its ability to document the Ebola virus's deadly progression in real time, accept patients for observation, run tests, and collect Ebola samples by bringing in over 1,000 medical and disease control experts from agencies such as the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, along with medical equipment, mobile laboratories, and ambulances. The end of the West African epidemic in 2016 didn't end the Chinese military's focus on the Ebola virus. Instead, the focus shifted to Canada, where Ms. Qiu was lauded that year for collaborating with Major General Zhang Shitao, the director of China's Academy of Military Medical Sciences. More plaudits came from Major General Chen Wei, who headed the Chinese military's research on biosafety, biodefense, and bioterrorism. Major General Chen, dubbed a wolf warrior and described in the Chinese press as our nation's ultimate expert in biological and chemical weapon defenses, stated that Ms. Qiu used Canada's Level 4 biosecurity laboratory as a base to assist China to improve its capability to fight highly pathogenic pathogens, and achieved brilliant results. On Ms. Qiu's orders, strains of the Ebola virus were shipped from the Winnipeg lab to China in 2019. China is unlikely to be developing Ebola capabilities for protect its own population. China has little to no susceptibility to an Ebola epidemic and also no history of Ebola. Neither is the United States, which views Communist China as its number one military threat, a likely proximate target for the Chinese regime. Epidemiologists generally agree that the developed world faces little risk of an epidemic because Ebola is relatively easy to contain once an outbreak occurs. The West's advanced infrastructure for sanitation and sewage, coupled with extensive healthcare facilities and tracking and quarantine controls, don't provide the fertile ground that could potentially allow Ebola to thrive. Taiwan, China's enemy to the east, would also be an unlikely target for an Ebola attack due to its superior medical infrastructure. Taiwan's healthcare system is reportedly ranked number 1 in the world, and it has exceptional containment skills. Not so for India, China's enemy to the south, whose highly populated, impoverished, and infrastructure-challenged regions make it highly susceptible to an Ebola epidemic, according to Mr. Shoam. His view echoes that of Peter Piot, Ebola's 1976 co-discoverer, who stated during the 2014 epidemic that an Ebola outbreak would be especially challenging for India, and Princeton University doctoral candidate Nikhil Pandey, who starkly laid out India's frailties in the Hindustan Times. India has yet to address its systemic vulnerability to Ebola, a failing that is especially glaring given the decades-long hostilities between the two countries' militaries and given the lessons of the COVID-19 pandemic, where China learned that its biological agents could bring adversaries far and near to their knees without firing a single shot.